February 23, 1945. Peleliu Island, Palau Archipelago. Corporal Takeshi Yamashita crouched in a cave 200 feet inside the coral ridge called Bloody Nose by the Americans. His hands shook as he gripped his Type 38 rifle, but not from fear of enemy bullets. Through the narrow cave entrance, he watched something that violated every law of warfare he understood. An American Sherman tank moved methodically along the ridge base, its turret replaced with a massive flamethrower nozzle. When it fired, a jet of liquid flame arced 150 yards into a cave mouth across the ravine. The fire did not simply burn. It flowed like water, seeking every crack and crevice, turning stone corridors into furnaces. The screaming began immediately and lasted for minutes that felt eternal. Yamashita had survived 3 months of American assault on Peleliu. He had endured naval bombardment that shook the earth. He had watched Marine infantry storm positions under withering machine gun fire. He had seen American resolve up close when wounded Marines continued fighting with injuries that would kill most men. But this weapon was different. This weapon made defense impossible. His diary entry that night, recovered decades later by American archaeologists, captured what Japanese defenders across the Pacific were learning. The Americans have brought fire that cannot be extinguished. It burns through rock, it consumes oxygen, it kills those it never touches. We called their Marines devils. But this fire is something worse. This is industrial death applied without mercy. 21,000 Japanese defenders occupied the Palau Islands when American forces invaded in September 1944. The islands had been transformed into fortresses over 2 years of preparation. Hundreds of caves had been enlarged and connected by tunnels. Concrete bunkers covered every approach. Artillery positions were registered on every landing beach. Japanese military planners believed the Palaus could hold for months, bleeding American forces so severely they might negotiate peace rather than invade the Japanese homeland. The Americans took Peleliu in 74 days, not through superior tactics or overwhelming numbers, though they had both. They took it through systematic application of a weapon Japanese defenders had no counter for: napalm, the jellied gasoline that burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that stuck to surfaces and could not be extinguished by water, that flowed into fortifications designed to withstand artillery, that killed through heat and suffocation, even when it never touched human skin. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The terror of napalm began not with ground forces but from the sky. July 23, 1944. Tinian Island in the Marianas. Lieutenant Hideki Nakamura commanded an anti-aircraft battery positioned on the island's southern coast. American forces were preparing to invade, and Japanese defenders had spent weeks under naval bombardment and air attack. Nakamura had grown accustomed to the sound of American bombs, high explosive ordnance that cratered the earth, fragmentation bombs that killed with steel shrapnel. But on this morning, American aircraft dropped something different. The bombs fell in clusters, breaking apart at 2,000 feet. 38 smaller bomblets spread across a wide area, trailing cloth tails behind them. When they struck, there was no explosion. Instead, each 6-pound canister ejected a jet of flaming gel that spread across everything it touched. Buildings constructed of wood and concrete began burning immediately. The flames were dark orange, almost red, and produced thick black smoke that obscured vision. Most disturbing to Nakamura was the sound, not the roar of high explosive or the crack of artillery, but a deep whooshing as oxygen was consumed by fire that seemed to burn without end. Nakamura's battery position was 200 yards from the closest strike. The heat was so intense that ammunition stored in bunkers began cooking off from radiant heat alone. 3 of his men attempted to flee through an area where napalm had landed. Their clothes caught fire instantly. They ran perhaps 20 yards before collapsing, their screams cutting through the chaos of battle. Other soldiers tried to help, using blankets to smother flames. The napalm stuck to the blankets and continued burning, Water thrown on burning napalm simply spread the fire further. Nothing worked. Nakamura's unit lost 47 men that day. Only 9 died from direct burns. The rest suffocated in bunkers as fire consumed all available oxygen, or died from heat stroke in caves that became ovens as surrounding rock heated beyond human tolerance. His report to Japanese command, captured, after Tinian fell, described the weapon in clinical detail. The American incendiary weapon is unlike conventional fire. It adheres to all surfaces, including human skin. It burns for 8 to 10 minutes at temperatures that exceed our understanding. Conventional firefighting methods are ineffective. Water spreads rather than extinguishes the flames. Smothering attempts fail because the substance continues burning beneath protective materials. Most concerning, the weapon is effective against fortified positions. It flows into cave entrances and tunnel systems, creating conditions incompatible with human life. Defenders who avoid direct contact still die from heat and asphyxiation. Standard defensive measures provide no protection. The weapon Nakamura described was the ANM-69 incendiary bomblet, developed by Standard Oil Company in 1943. Each bomblet was a hexagonal steel pipe, 3 inches in diameter and 20 inches long, weighing 6 pounds. Inside was napalm, a mixture of naphthenic acid and palmitic acid combined with gasoline to create a sticky gel that burned longer and hotter than pure gasoline. The chemistry was elegant in its lethality. Regular gasoline explodes into a brief fireball that dissipates quickly. Napalm burns steadily for 8 to 10 minutes, adhering to whatever it touches and reaching temperatures between 800 and 1200 degrees Celsius. This was not accidental. Scientists at Harvard University, working in secret laboratories, had specifically designed napalm to maximize destruction of fortified positions and burn through defensive structures. The military applications were immediately apparent. Against bunkers and caves where Japanese forces sheltered, napalm was devastatingly effective. By February 1945, American forces had refined napalm delivery to industrial scale. Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers could carry 40 cluster bombs in their bomb bays. Each cluster contained 38 ANM-69 bomblets. That meant a single B-29 carried 1,520 individual incendiary devices. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, 334 B-29s took off from air bases in the Marianas bound for Tokyo. They carried over 500,000 napalm bomblets. The resulting firestorm destroyed 15.8 square miles of the Japanese capital, killed an estimated 100,000 civilians, and demonstrated that American industrial capacity could produce napalm weapons faster than Japanese cities could recover from their effects. But the terror of napalm was most immediate and personal for Japanese soldiers facing American ground forces in the Pacific Islands. These men did not die in distant firestorms or anonymous mass casualties. They died in caves and bunkers, trapped in fortifications that became crematoriums, as American forces methodically burned them out position by position. Private First Class Kenji Matsumoto, serving with the 2nd Infantry Regiment on Peleliu, kept a diary through the battle. His entries chronicle the progressive breakdown of Japanese defensive psychology as napalm was deployed against them. September 17th, 1944, 2 days after the American landing, the Marines brought tanks equipped with flamethrowers. We watched from our positions as they approached the cave complex on Hill 80. The first tank stopped 50 yards from the entrance. A jet of flame shot from its turret, reaching into the cave mouth. Men ran out, their uniforms on fire. Marines shot them as they emerged. The tank continued firing for 2 minutes. When it stopped, nothing moved inside the cave. 63 men were stationed there. None survived. September 23rd, 1944. American aircraft dropped incendiary bombs on the Umerbrogol ridges. The jellied gasoline strips vegetation from the coral. Everything that was green is now black. The ridges that provided concealment are now exposed. Worse, the napalm seeps into the porous coral rock. Hours after the bombing stopped, fires continued burning deep underground. Two cave positions in our sector became uninhabitable when napalm fire spread through connected tunnels. 40 men died, suffocated by smoke and heat. We tried to rescue them, but the temperature inside made entry impossible. We sealed the caves and left their bodies. October 7th, 1944. The Marines have perfected their assault tactics. They advance with infantry, providing suppressing fire, while flamethrower teams approach our positions. The flamethrower operators are protected by riflemen who kill anyone who exposes himself to shoot. When the flamethrower reaches effective range, approximately 40 yards, resistance becomes impossible. The flame shoots through firing ports designed to stop bullets and grenades. It fills the bunker interior. Men cannot breathe. Those who run outside are shot. Those who remain die from heat and suffocation. This morning, 3 bunkers in our sector were destroyed this way. 96 men killed in less than 1 hour. The effectiveness of napalm against fortified positions derived from physics that Japanese defenders could neither understand nor counter. Concrete bunkers designed to withstand direct hits from battleship shells provided no protection against fire that flowed through openings like liquid. The firing ports and vision slits necessary for defensive positions became entry points for flames. Ventilation systems designed to provide fresh air distributed heat and smoke throughout connected tunnels. Even sealed chambers became death traps as surrounding rock heated and radiated temperatures fatal to human life. Most insidious was napalm's effect on oxygen. Fire consumes oxygen through combustion. In the confined space of a bunker or cave, this creates negative pressure that draws more fire inward while simultaneously depleting breathable air. Japanese defenders discovered they could die from suffocation while flames were still 20 yards from their position, killed by the simple absence of oxygen as fire consumed all available air. American forces recognized napalm's psychological impact and exploited it systematically. Standard tactics on Peleliu and later battles involved napalm bombardment followed by ground assault with portable flamethrowers. The aerial attack stripped vegetation and exposed positions. The ground attack then methodically cleared each exposed fortification. Marines called this combination blowtorch and corkscrew. Infantry cordoned positions to prevent escape. Flamethrower teams approached under covering fire. Demolitions followed to seal caves after fire had killed defenders. The process was brutal, methodical, and effective. Progress was measured not in yards gained, but in bunkers destroyed per day. On Peleliu, Marine divisions equipped with portable M2-2 flamethrowers faced Japanese defenses that had been 2 years in preparation. The M2-2 was a backpack-mounted weapon consisting of 3 bottles, 2 containing napalm fuel and 1 containing compressed nitrogen as propellant. Total weight was 68 pounds. Effective range was 40 yards. Burn time was approximately 10 seconds divided into 8 to 10 short bursts. The weapon transformed its operator into a walking target. The bright orange flame made concealment impossible. The bulky fuel tanks prevented rapid movement. Life expectancy of a flamethrower operator in combat was measured in minutes, but the weapon's effectiveness justified the risk. Corporal Yoshio Tanaka, captured on Peleliu in November 1944 after hiding in caves for 6 weeks following the official surrender, described his experiences in post-war interrogations. The flamethrowers terrified us more than any weapon the Americans used. You could fight against rifles and machine guns by taking cover. Artillery and bombing killed randomly, but you had a chance if you stayed in deep positions. The flamethrowers gave no chance. Once the fire entered your position, death was certain. You could run outside into American guns, or stay inside and burn or suffocate. There was no third option. We tried everything. We built right-angle turns in tunnels, hoping fire could not reach around corners. It did. Napalm splashed on walls and continued burning. The fire spread heat through the tunnel system until men died from heat stroke before flames ever reached them. We tried sealing firing ports after battles, but sealed positions became tombs when Americans poured napalm through ventilation shafts and ignited it with white phosphorus mortar rounds. We tried counter-attacking flamethrower teams before they reached effective range. Marines protected the flamethrower operators with overwhelming suppressing fire. Riflemen killed anyone who showed themselves. By October, we stopped trying to fight the flamethrowers. We waited for them to kill us because there was nothing else to do. Tank-mounted flamethrowers proved even more devastating than portable weapons. The M4A3 Sherman tank, equipped with the Navy Mark I flamethrower system, carried 170 gallons of napalm fuel and could project flame up to 150 yards with thickened napalm. The tank provided armor protection that allowed it to approach Japanese positions that would kill portable flamethrower operators. 8 such tanks landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, designated D-Day for the invasion. Within days, Marine units were holding up advances, waiting for flamethrower tanks to arrive, because no other weapon could reduce Japanese cave fortifications with acceptable casualties. First Lieutenant Tadamichi Ogawa commanded a reinforced company dug into caves near the base of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. His position included 163 men occupying a complex of interconnected caves with multiple entrances and firing positions covering the approach from the beach. Japanese military engineers had spent 8 months improving the natural caves, adding concrete reinforcement and creating ventilation shafts that allowed defenders to survive even direct bomb hits. Ogawa's diary, found after his death on February 24, describes the arrival of American flamethrower tanks. The tanks arrived at dawn on February 23rd. We had destroyed 3 American Shermans the previous day with anti-tank guns and felt confident we could stop armor assaults. These tanks were different. They approached to within 100 meters, far beyond range of our hand-thrown explosives, and began firing. Not shells, but liquid fire that shot from the main gun opening. The first burst hit our primary cave entrance. Flame filled the opening and continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Men stationed near the entrance died, immediately, burned or suffocated. Those deeper in the cave system survived but were trapped. The tank repositioned and fired into our secondary entrance. More men died. Then, the tank crew used their machine guns to kill anyone who tried to escape. For 6 hours, 3 flamethrower tanks worked methodically through our position. They would fire, pause while the napalm burned, then fire again. We could not fight them because they stayed beyond our weapon range. We could not escape because infantry surrounded our position. By evening, 127 men of my company were dead. The survivors surrendered, something I never believed Japanese soldiers would do. But death by fire broke something in us that bullets and bombs never could. The psychological impact of napalm extended beyond immediate tactical effects. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spiritual strength over material power, teaching soldiers that superior will could overcome inferior weapons. This belief system crumbled when confronted with napalm. No amount of courage or determination could survive in a cave filled with burning gel that consumed oxygen and heated rock to temperatures that cooked human tissue. The weapon reduced Bushido, the samurai code of death before dishonor, to meaningless gestures. Men could choose to die burning in caves or die shot while escaping, but the ritual meaning of death was destroyed by the industrial nature of napalm's killing. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa commanded Japanese forces on Peleliu and developed what Japanese military leadership considered the most effective defensive strategy against American assault. He banned wasteful banzai charges, created defense in depth using natural caves, and planned to exact such casualties that Americans might negotiate rather than continue island hopping toward Japan. His tactics worked insofar as Peleliu cost the Americans dear. The 1st Marine Division suffered such casualties it was pulled from the line and replaced. But Nakagawa's defences ultimately failed because they had no answer to napalm. His final radio message to Japanese command, sent on November 23, 1944, hours before his ritual suicide, acknowledged this. Our defences held for 68 days, far longer than other islands. We inflicted over 10,000 American casualties, a ratio approaching 1-to-1 despite our inferior numbers, but we could not overcome their fire weapons. The Americans used flamethrowers and napalm bombs to bypass our strongest positions. They did not assault bunkers that would cost heavy casualties. They simply burned the defenders to death from safe distance. No defensive position we created could withstand this tactic. Future commanders must understand this. The Americans will use fire weapons to destroy any fortification. Courage and determination mean nothing against industrial fire. The war is lost not because our soldiers lack spirit, but because American industry has created weapons our spirit cannot overcome. Nakagawa's assessment spread through the Japanese military as surviving officers from Pacific battles returned to Japan or were reassigned to other theaters. By early 1945, intelligence briefings for units deploying to defensive positions included explicit warnings about American napalm weapons. One such briefing document, captured on Okinawa in May 1945, provided instructions that revealed how thoroughly napalm had shattered Japanese defensive confidence. American ground forces employ portable flamethrowers with effective range of 40 yards and tank-mounted flamethrowers with range exceeding 150 yards. Both use gelid gasoline called napalm that burns at temperatures fatal to human life. Conventional defensive positions provide no protection. Fire enters through firing ports, ventilation shafts, and cave entrances. It consumes oxygen, creating suffocation hazard, even for troops not directly contacted by flames. When engaging American forces equipped with flamethrowers, all tactical options lead to high casualties. Remaining in fortified position results in death from fire or suffocation. Evacuating position results in death from American infantry weapons. Counter-attacking flamethrower teams results in death from supporting arms. The only tactically sound response is to abandon positions before flamethrower teams reach effective range. However, this negates the defensive value of fortifications. Commanders must accept that American flamethrower tactics make prolonged defense of static positions impossible. This conclusion represented catastrophic admission for military doctrine built around defensive attrition. If fortified positions could not be defended once Americans deployed flamethrowers, then the entire strategy of bleeding American forces through defense in depth collapsed. The Americans would simply burn out defenders methodically, accepting time costs but minimizing casualties through systematic application of overwhelming firepower, which is precisely what happened on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The mathematics were brutal but simple. American forces could afford to take weeks or months to clear islands if doing so reduced casualties. Japanese defenders could not afford to abandon fortifications because doing so meant fighting in the open against overwhelming American firepower. Napalm broke this strategic deadlock decisively in America's favor. The scale of napalm production and deployment illustrated American industrial advantages that Japanese military planners had consistently underestimated. By 1945, American factories produced napalm at rates that would have been incomprehensible to Japanese observers. The National Fireworks plant in New Jersey alone produced over half the napalm used in the Tokyo firebombing raid of March 1945. Production was measured not in pounds but in tens of thousands of tons. Distribution was global. Bases in the Marianas, Okinawa, and later Japan itself stockpiled millions of pounds of napalm for tactical and strategic use. The substance was cheap to produce, easy to transport, and devastating in effect. This combination made it ideal for the kind of warfare American forces were waging in the Pacific. Industrial capacity translated directly into combat power in ways Japanese forces had no counter for. Private First Class Haruki Ito, who survived the sinking of a transport ship in November 1944 and spent the rest of the war in American captivity, described his introduction to napalm during interrogation. "I was stationed on Saipan before our unit was ordered to reinforce the Philippines. We never reached there because American submarines sank our transport. In captivity, American interrogators showed me photographs of Japanese cities after firebombing raids. The destruction was incomprehensible. Entire city blocks burned to foundations. The Americans told us they had used the same weapon we faced on Saipan, but dropped from aircraft by the hundreds of tons. I remembered watching American planes drop incendiary bombs on our positions, individuals' bomblets that created small fires we could sometimes extinguish. The interrogators explained that against cities, thousands of these bomblets fell simultaneously, creating firestorms that burned for hours. No firefighting was possible at that scale. This was when I understood we had lost the war. Not because American soldiers were better fighters, though they often were. Not because American tactics were superior, though they usually were. We lost because American industry could produce weapons in quantities that made resistance futile. They could drop more napalm on one city in one night than our entire military used in a year. How do you win against that? You don't. The operational employment of napalm evolved rapidly as American forces refined tactics based on combat experience. Early use at Tinian in July 1944 was experimental, testing effectiveness against fortified positions. By Peleliu in September 1944, napalm had become standard for bunker reduction. By Iwo Jima in February 1945, American commanders demanded flamethrower support for any assault on fortified positions and would postpone attacks if flamethrower tanks were unavailable. By Okinawa in April through June 1945, napalm use reached industrial scale with over 600 flamethrower attacks consuming 200,000 gallons of napalm-thickened fuel. The learning curve was steep, and the Japanese paid the cost. Toward the end of the battle on Iwo Jima, 5th Marine tanks expended between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of napalm per day. This represented more napalm than many Japanese garrisons saw during entire battles earlier in the war. The acceleration of napalm deployment paralleled acceleration of casualties inflicted on Japanese defenders. Early battles saw Japanese forces able to exact high American casualties before being overrun. Later battles saw American forces methodically burning out positions with minimal casualties to assault forces. The shift was not subtle. It was the difference between grinding attritional warfare and systematic extermination of defenders who had no effective response. Corporal Takeshi Yamashita, whose diary opened this account, survived Peleliu through a combination of luck and isolation. His cave complex in Bloody Nose Ridge was bypassed by American forces who sealed the entrance with explosives and moved on to more threatening positions. He lived on stored rations and rainwater for 6 weeks after organized resistance ended, emerging finally on January 2, 1946, along with 26 other Japanese soldiers who had hidden in the extensive Peleliu cave systems. His post-war testimony provides rare insight into how Japanese soldiers processed their experiences with napalm. The Americans showed us propaganda films while we were in custody. They wanted us to understand why we had lost, so we would not resist repatriation. One film showed the firebombing of Tokyo. The narration explained that over 400,000 Japanese civilians had died in firebombing raids using the same napalm we experienced on Peleliu. This is what broke me psychologically. On Peleliu, we believed our sacrifice had meaning. We were delaying American advances toward Japan, buying time for the homeland to prepare defenses. But if American industry could produce enough napalm to burn entire cities, our sacrifice meant nothing. They would simply burn Japan to ash regardless of how many soldiers we killed or how long we held our positions. The weapon rendered our entire strategy meaningless. When I understood this, I felt not anger or hatred toward the Americans, but despair at the futility of everything we had endured. This demoralization spread through the Japanese military as word of napalm's effects reached troops preparing for the defense of Japan itself. Intelligence estimates suggested American invasion of the home islands would occur in late 1945 or early 1946. Japanese military leadership planned a defense that would inflict casualties so horrific that Americans would accept negotiated peace rather than pay the cost of conquest. This strategy required Japanese soldiers to believe their sacrifice would achieve strategic objectives. Napalm destroyed that belief. If Americans could burn out defensive positions from safe distance, if they could incinerate cities with impunity, if their industrial capacity could produce fire weapons faster than Japan could build fortifications, then sacrifice became merely death without purpose. The scale of napalm deployment on Iwo Jima demonstrated American commitment to using fire as a primary weapon. February 19, 1945. D-Day, for Operation Detachment. 70,000 Marines of the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions landed on the southeastern beaches under the shadow of Mount Suribachi. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded 21,000 Japanese defenders dug into 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 cave positions. He had spent 8 months preparing defenses specifically designed to exact maximum American casualties. His strategy avoided wasteful banzai charges in favor of defense in depth. Every position was covered by multiple firing points. Every approach was registered for artillery and mortar fire. The beach itself was a killing ground. But Kuribayashi had not adequately prepared for the scale of American flamethrower operations. 8P OACWSH, 1 flamethrower tanks landed with the assault waves. These modified M4A3 Sherman tanks carried 390 gallons of napalm and could project flame 150 yards. The Navy Mark I flamethrower system replaced the tank's 75mm main gun with a flame projector capable of sustained bursts. Marine commanders called these tanks the best single weapon of the operation. The flamethrower tanks proved their worth immediately. Japanese bunkers that survived 3 days of naval bombardment fell to concentrated napalm attacks within hours. The tanks would approach to within 100 yards, far beyond range of Japanese anti-tank grenades, and methodically burn out each position. Standard tactics involved infantry suppressing Japanese fire while the tank positioned itself, then delivering multiple bursts of flame through firing ports and cave entrances. The napalm stuck to concrete and stone, continuing to burn after the initial burst. Heat radiated through bunker walls, killing defenders who were never touched by flames. Private First Class Saburo Endo, captured on Iwo Jima on March 8 after spending 17 days hiding in sealed caves, described the terror of facing flamethrower tanks. We heard the tanks approaching through the sound of battle. The engine noise was distinctive, different from other Sherman tanks. When the flamethrower fired, it made a roaring whoosh that carried across the battlefield. You could hear men screaming inside bunkers as the fire reached them. The psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers who had sworn to fight to death began contemplating surrender simply to avoid burning. We were trained to accept death by bullet, bayonet, or artillery. Death by fire was different. It was prolonged agony. The smell of burning flesh carried on the wind. Men who witnessed their comrades burned alive lost the will to resist. They abandoned positions rather than face the flamethrower tanks. The systematic nature of American flamethrower tactics on Iwo Jima approached industrial efficiency. Marine divisions organized specialized assault teams combining infantry, demolitions, and flamethrowers. Standard procedure involved infantry cordoning a target position, demolitions preparing explosives to seal caves after clearing, and flamethrower operators approaching under covering fire. The process repeated hundreds of times across the island. Progress was measured not in territory gained, but in bunkers destroyed per day. Marine after-action reports meticulously documented napalm expenditure. On February 24 alone, 5 days after the landing, flamethrower tanks consumed over 5,000 gallons of napalm clearing Japanese positions on the northern slopes of Mount Suribachi. This represented more napalm than many earlier Pacific battles used during entire campaigns. By March 1st, American forces controlled 2/3 of Iwo Jima, but combat efficiency was degrading. Casualty figures had reached tragic proportions. Over 16,000 American casualties, including 3,000 killed, faced 14,000 Japanese casualties. The campaign had become attritional warfare reminiscent of World War I, trenches. But American commanders had one advantage Japanese defenders lacked: unlimited napalm supply. Ships offshore carried tens of thousands of gallons in reserve. Flamethrower tanks that expended their fuel returned to beach supply dumps for refilling within hours. The operational tempo never slowed. Sergeant Masao Yoshida commanded a platoon defending a cave complex in the Motoyama Plateau region. His position included 42 men occupying interconnected caves with 3 entrances and multiple firing positions. The position had survived aerial bombing and naval bombardment intact. On March 4th, American Marines attacked with flamethrower support. Yoshida's diary entry that night, recovered after his death on March 7th, described the assault. The Marines appeared at dawn with 3 flamethrower tanks. They did not attempt to storm our position. They systematically approached each entrance and fired. The first burst hit our primary entrance. Flame filled the tunnel for, perhaps 40 yards. 8 men died immediately. The heat was so intense that those of us deeper in the cave system could barely breathe. The Americans waited. They knew the fire would spread through the caves. After 10 minutes, they fired again. This time, the flame reached our central chamber. Men ran toward the exits to escape. American riflemen shot them as they emerged. Those who remained in the caves died from heat and suffocation. I survived because I was in the deepest chamber, but the temperature was unbearable. We had no water. The air was thick with smoke. By nightfall, only 17 men remained alive from 42. The following day, the Americans returned. They sealed our primary entrance with explosives. Then they poured drums of napalm into the secondary entrance and ignited it with white phosphorus grenades. The entire cave system became a furnace. I do not know how to describe the sound of men burning to death. It is not screaming. It is something beyond that, something that will haunt me until I die. We surrendered. 12 men crawled from the caves with our hands raised. American Marines gave us water and medical treatment. They seemed relieved we had surrendered rather than forcing them to kill us. One Marine told me through a translator that his flamethrower team had cleared 47 positions in 6 days. He had stopped counting the dead. The casualty rates for flamethrower operators justified Yoshida's observation that Americans preferred surrender to continuing the slaughter. Flamethrower teams suffered disproportionate casualties. The bright orange flame made operators visible targets. The bulky fuel tanks prevented rapid movement. Japanese soldiers understood that killing flamethrower operators would stop the advance more effectively than killing riflemen. Priority targeting meant flamethrower operators had life expectancies measured in minutes during active combat. Despite this, volunteers for flamethrower duty never lacked. Marines understood that flamethrowers saved lives overall by reducing the time required to take positions. Quick victories meant fewer total casualties, even if flamethrower operators paid a terrible price. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams earned the Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima for actions that exemplified both the courage required for flamethrower operations and their devastating effectiveness. On February 23, 1945, Williams volunteered to lead a flamethrower assault against Japanese pillboxes that had stopped the advance of his company. For 4 hours, he repeatedly advanced alone through enemy fire to within yards of pillbox openings, delivering napalm bursts that killed defenders and destroyed positions. He cleared 7 major fortifications that day, enabling his company to advance. 12 Marines died, providing covering fire for Williams. His citation noted that his actions went beyond normal expectations because flamethrower operations required exposing oneself to enemy fire with no protection. The Japanese learned to fear not just the weapons, but the men who carried them. Intelligence reports captured on Iwo Jima described flamethrower operators as special assault troops who showed no fear of death. This was not entirely accurate. Flamethrower operators felt fear like any soldier, but they had accepted that their role required exposing themselves to enemy fire in ways other Marines did not. This acceptance created the appearance of fearlessness that terrified defenders who believed courage could overcome material disadvantage. When courage could not stop men who walked through machine gun fire to burn out bunkers, Japanese defensive psychology collapsed. The final phase of fighting on Iwo Jima, from mid-March through the official end on March 26th, demonstrated napalm's role in reducing the last Japanese positions. General Kuribayashi and approximately 3,000 defenders controlled a pocket in the northwestern portion of the island, measuring roughly 1 square mile. The terrain was broken volcanic rock honeycomb with caves and ravines. Conventional assault would have required weeks and cost thousands of American casualties. Instead, Marines cordoned the area and systematically burned out every position using flamethrowers and napalm-filled demolition charges. The process was methodical and brutal. Infantry would identify a cave entrance. Flamethrower teams would approach and deliver sustained bursts until no resistance remained. Demolition engineers would then seal the entrance with explosives to prevent reoccupation. If defenders fled to connecting tunnels, the process repeated at other entrances until the entire complex was cleared or sealed. Marines sometimes poured 55-gallon drums of napalm into cave mouths, then ignited the fuel with white phosphorus grenades. The resulting inferno killed through heat, flames, and oxygen depletion. Lieutenant Toshihiko Ono commanded one of the last organized Japanese units on Iwo Jima. His position included 137 men occupying a complex cave system in the northern end of the island. American forces surrounded the position on March 15th and demanded surrender. Ono refused. For 11 days, his men held out as Marines systematically reduced surrounding positions. On March 26th, the day the island was officially declared secure, American forces made a final assault on Ono's position, using concentrated napalm attacks. Only 2 of his men survived by hiding deep in sealed chambers. They would not emerge until January 6, 1949, nearly 4 years after the battle ended. The statistical record of napalm use on Iwo Jima revealed the scale of American commitment to fire warfare. Marine units expended over 200,000 gallons of napalm during the 36-day battle. This represented more napalm than had been used in all previous Pacific campaigns combined. The industrial capacity that enabled this expenditure astonished Japanese military analysts who studied the battle. One captured intelligence report noted that American logistics delivered napalm to forward units faster than those units could expend it. Supply was never constrained. The only limit was how quickly flamethrower teams could approach and burn out positions. The Battle of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, would dwarf even Iwo Jima's napalm expenditure. American forces committed over 180,000 troops to the invasion of Okinawa, the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific War. Japanese forces numbered approximately 100,000, including Okinawan conscripts. The battle would last 82 days and result in over 100,000 Japanese military casualties, 12,000 American were killed, 38,000 American wounded, and as many as 150,000 Okinawan civilian deaths. Napalm played a central role in the grinding attrition that characterized Okinawa. The Japanese anchored their defenses at Shuri Castle, supported by a series of fortified ridges, including Kakazu Ridge, Dakeshi Ridge, Wana Ridge, and Sugarloaf Hill. Each position was heavily fortified with caves, bunkers, and concrete emplacements. American forces employed blowtorch and corkscrew tactics to reduce each position. Blowtorch meant flamethrowers and napalm. Corkscrew meant explosives to seal positions after fire had killed defenders. The fighting at Wana Ridge and Wana Draw in May 1945 illustrated the brutal mathematics of fire warfare on Okinawa. 1st Marine Division faced Japanese positions on reverse slopes protected from direct fire. Marines manually rolled 55-gallon drums of napalm to the top of ridges, smashed open the tops with rifle butts and axes, then rolled the open barrels down into the draws where Japanese caves were located. When the drums reached or spilled near cave entrances, Marines ignited them with white phosphorus grenades. The resulting conflagration consumed oxygen throughout cave systems, suffocating defenders who never saw flames. From May 11th through May 30th, the 1st Marine Division lost approximately 200 Marines for every 100 yards gained. The Japanese losses were far higher, but they sold every yard at a price that would have stopped any army without access to unlimited fire weapons. Private First Class Ichiro Tanaka defended a position in Wana Draw during the May assaults. He survived by remaining in the deepest portions of cave systems, emerging only at night to retrieve supplies and report to company headquarters. His testimony, recorded in 1983, described what defenders experienced. The Americans did not assault our positions directly during daylight. They used napalm. Drums would roll down the hillside, spilling burning gel as they tumbled. If a drum reached a cave entrance, everyone inside died. The heat was beyond description. Stone walls radiated temperature that cooked men who stood too close. The air became unbreathable. Even if you avoided direct contact with fire, you would suffocate from lack of oxygen or die from heat stroke. We tried everything to counter this tactic. We attempted to shoot the drums before they reached our positions, but rifle fire only punctured them, spreading burning napalm further. We tried to deflect drums with obstacles, but Marines adjusted their drop points. Eventually, we realized there was no defense. We could either abandon our positions or die in them. Most chose to die because retreating meant facing court-martial and execution by our own officers. The systematic application of napalm against Okinawa's cave defenses reached a scale unprecedented in warfare. During the battle, American forces expended over 600,000 gallons of napalm in ground operations alone. This figure excluded aerial napalm bombing, which added millions of pounds delivered by aircraft. The logistics required to sustain this expenditure demonstrated American industrial superiority in stark terms. Supply ships arrived daily with fresh stocks of napalm. Forward supply dumps maintained reserves sufficient for days of intensive operations. Units requested napalm resupply through normal logistics channels, receiving delivery within hours. The contrast with Japanese forces, who rationed ammunition and food, could not have been more dramatic. Japanese military leadership watching the Battle of Okinawa unfold recognized that napalm had fundamentally altered defensive warfare. Traditional fortifications provided no protection. The depth and sophistication of cave systems made no difference. American forces would simply burn out every position methodically until resistance ended. The strategic implications were catastrophic for Japan's planned defense of the home islands. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, senior operations officer for Japanese forces on Okinawa, designed the defensive strategy that turned the island into a killing ground for American forces. His concept emphasized attrition over decisive battles. Every position would be defended until destroyed. Every American advance would cost maximum casualties. The strategy worked insofar as American casualties on Okinawa exceeded those of any other Pacific battle. But Yahara later acknowledged that napalm defeated his strategy's fundamental premise. He had calculated American casualty tolerance based on infantry assault tactics. Napalm changed the calculation. Americans accepted the time cost of systematic fire warfare in exchange for reduced casualties from direct assault. Yahara's defenses killed tens of thousands of Americans but ultimately failed because American commanders had both unlimited time and unlimited napalm. The Battle of Sugarloaf Hill exemplified this dynamic. The 6th Marine Division attacked Sugarloaf beginning May 12th. The hill appeared insignificant, barely 100 feet high, but it anchored Japanese defenses, protecting the approach to Shuri Castle. The position was connected to 2 other hills by tunnels, creating a mutually supporting complex. Japanese defenders could withdraw through tunnels when one hill came under attack, then emerge to counterattack from unexpected directions. Initial assaults failed with heavy Marine casualties. On May 14th, Marines captured Sugarloaf's summit only to be driven off by counterattacks from the tunnel system. The battle devolved into attritional horror. Marines would take the hill during daylight, only to be pushed off at night by Japanese counterattacks emerging from tunnels. The cycle repeated for 8 days. Casualties mounted horrifically on both sides. The 6th Marine Division suffered over 2,500, casualties taking and holding Sugarloaf. Japanese defenders lost an entire regiment, approximately 4,000 men, defending the position. The battle finally ended when Marines sealed tunnel entrances with demolitions and used concentrated napalm to kill defenders who could not evacuate through blocked tunnels. The last organized resistance ended May 20th when flamethrower teams burned out the final cave complexes. Corporal James Day, who earned the Medal of Honor during the Sugarloaf fighting, described the final assault in a 1996 interview. "We had tried everything else. Direct assault, artillery bombardment, tank attacks. Nothing worked because the Japanese could retreat through tunnels and return after we thought the position was secured. Finally, we brought up flamethrower tanks and portable flamethrowers. We systematically worked around the hill, burning out every cave entrance we could find. The demolitions teams sealed tunnels as we cleared them. It took 2 days of continuous flamethrower operations to finally clear Sugarloaf. I do not know how many Japanese died in those caves. Hundreds, certainly. Maybe more. The smell of burning flesh hung over that hill for weeks afterward. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 overshadowed the strategic impact of napalm in post-war analysis. Nuclear weapons ended the war and demonstrated a new category of destructive power that redefined military calculations. But Japanese military officers and civilians who experienced both conventional firebombing and atomic warfare often made disturbing comparisons. The Tokyo firebombing of March 9th to 10th killed more people than the Hiroshima bomb. Multiple Japanese cities suffered destruction comparable to atomic attacks through accumulated napalm bombing. The difference was speed and psychological impact, not total destruction. Napalm killed slowly over hours. Nuclear weapons killed instantly. But the end result, cities reduced to ash and thousands dead, was similar. Sergeant Kenji Matsuda, who survived the Hiroshima bombing while serving with an artillery unit stationed outside the city, witnessed both types of American firepower. His post-war memoir compared the experiences. The atomic bomb was terrifying because it was instantaneous. One moment there was a city. The next moment, nothing but smoke and fire. But the firebombing raids I witnessed earlier in the war were equally terrifying in a different way. You watched the bombers approach, watched the bombs fall, watched the fires start, and realized you could do nothing to stop it. The fires burned for hours. People died slowly. The scale of destruction was comparable. Both weapons demonstrated that American industrial capacity had advanced beyond our ability to counter. Whether they killed us with atomic fire or napalm fire made little difference to the dead. Both proved we could not win. The legacy of napalm warfare extended far beyond World War II. The weapon's effectiveness against fortified positions and its psychological impact on defenders made it a standard tool of American military doctrine for decades. Napalm saw extensive use in Korea from 1950 to 1953, where American forces again faced enemies dug into cave systems and bunkers. The tactics developed on Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa transferred directly to Korean battlefields. Later, in Vietnam, napalm became one of the most controversial weapons of the war, its use against villages and suspected enemy positions, creating images that shocked the American public and energized the anti-war movement. But for Japanese soldiers who faced napalm in the Pacific, the weapon represented something more fundamental than a tactical innovation. It represented the complete victory of industrial capacity over martial spirit. Japanese military doctrine had emphasized that superior morale and willingness to sacrifice could overcome material disadvantages. The Pacific War tested this belief against American industrial capacity, and the belief failed catastrophically. Napalm was the purest expression of this failure. No amount of courage, no depth of fortification, no cleverness of tactics could overcome an enemy who could produce fire weapons in unlimited quantities and apply them systematically until resistance ceased. Private First Class Haruki Ito, who survived submarine attack and spent the war in American captivity, summarized this realization in a 1978 interview. We were taught that Japanese spirit was superior to American materialism, that our willingness to die would make us invincible. The Americans proved that superior spirit plus overwhelming material resources defeats spirit alone every time. They had soldiers as brave as ours. They had training as rigorous as ours. But they also had unlimited ammunition, unlimited fuel, unlimited napalm, unlimited everything. We had courage and rifles and promises that spirit would triumph. It did not triumph. It could never triumph. Napalm taught us this lesson in the most terrible way possible. The statistical record of napalm casualties remains incomplete because Japanese military records were destroyed, and many deaths resulted from suffocation or heat rather than direct burns, making classification difficult. However, conservative estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers died from napalm-related causes during Pacific Island campaigns. If aerial napalm bombing is included, the total may exceed 100,000 military and civilian deaths directly attributable to napalm. These figures are dwarfed by casualties from conventional weapons and atomic bombs, but the psychological impact of napalm deaths exceeded their statistical proportion. Post-war interviews with Japanese veterans revealed consistent themes: the fear of burning to death, the helplessness of being trapped in fortifications that became ovens, the horror of watching comrades die in flames, the realization that courage meant nothing against industrial fire. These memories haunted survivors for decades. Support groups for Pacific War veterans in Japan reported that nightmares about napalm were among the most common persistent psychological traumas, comparable to those experienced by atomic bomb survivors. The technical lessons learned from Pacific napalm warfare influenced American military doctrine permanently. The Marine Corps institutionalized combined arms tactics that integrated flamethrowers, demolitions, and infantry into standard assault packages. Tank-mounted flamethrower development continued through the 1950s, with improved systems increasing range and fuel capacity. The chemistry of napalm itself evolved, with new formulations burning hotter and adhering more effectively to surfaces. By the Vietnam War, napalm technology had advanced to the point where Mark 77 napalm bombs could generate temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius and burn for up to 10 minutes. For the Japanese military, the lessons of napalm warfare were absorbed into defensive doctrine but provided no solutions. Japanese self-defense forces, established after the war, studied American flamethrower tactics extensively, but concluded that no conventional defense could stop systematic application of fire weapons backed by overwhelming logistics. The only counter to napalm was never being in a position where fixed defenses were necessary. This influenced Japanese military thinking toward mobile defense and early warning systems, rather than fortified positions. The moral and ethical questions raised by napalm use in World War II remain debated. American military planners justified napalm as a weapon that reduced overall casualties by shortening battles and forcing quicker surrenders. The alternative, they argued, was prolonged conventional assaults that would kill more soldiers on both sides. Japanese defenders who experienced napalm warfare offered a different perspective. They argued that the weapon's nature, burning men alive in sealed caves, violated the dignity of death in combat that both American and Japanese military traditions honored. The debate intensified during and after Vietnam, when images of napalm victims, including civilians, shocked global audiences and contributed to the weapon's controversial reputation. In 1980, the United Nations Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons established Protocol 3, which restricted but did not ban the use of incendiary weapons against military targets. The protocol prohibited using incendiary weapons against civilian populations or military objectives located within concentrations of civilians. However, many nations, including the United States, have not ratified this protocol, maintaining that incendiary weapons remain legitimate tools of warfare when used against military targets. The human cost of napalm warfare is best understood through individual stories rather than statistics. Corporal Takeshi Yamashita, who survived Peleliu and later became a teacher in post-war Japan, spent decades processing his experiences. In a 1992 interview conducted shortly before his death, he reflected on what napalm had taught him about modern warfare. The Americans did not invent cruelty with napalm. War has always been cruel. What they invented was systematic industrial cruelty, applied without pause until the enemy was destroyed. The flamethrowers came every day. The napalm drums rolled down every hill. The fire never stopped until we were all dead or surrendered. This was not the work of sadists enjoying suffering. This was the work of an industrial system that calculated how to destroy enemies most efficiently and then executed that calculation perfectly. That is what frightened me most. Not the weapon itself, but the system that produced it, deployed it, and used it, without hesitation or mercy. That system was unstoppable. Individual courage meant nothing against it. Collective sacrifice meant nothing against it. The only option was to surrender or die. Most of us chose death because we had been taught that death was honorable. But there was no honor in burning alive in a cave. There was only pain and terror, and the knowledge that our sacrifice achieved nothing. The lessons of Pacific napalm warfare extended beyond military tactics to influence how nations thought about industrial warfare. The Pacific campaigns demonstrated that modern war was fundamentally different from historical warfare. Victory no longer belonged to the side with superior courage, better tactics, or more disciplined soldiers. Victory belonged to the side with superior industrial capacity that could produce weapons in quantities that overwhelmed any defense. The atomic bomb proved this principle at strategic scale. Napalm proved it at tactical scale. Both weapons showed that technological and industrial advantages, when pressed ruthlessly, made traditional military virtues insufficient. This realization fundamentally altered Japanese national psychology. The post-war pacifist constitution, the reluctance to maintain large military forces, the emphasis on economic rather than military power, all reflected lessons learned from facing American industrial warfare. If industrial capacity determined military outcomes, then building economic power became more important than building military power. Japan's post-war economic miracle, the transformation from defeated empire to economic superhouse in 3 decades, reflected this strategic recalculation. For American military planners, napalm's success validated the systematic application of overwhelming firepower to achieve objectives while minimizing friendly casualties. This doctrine would define American military operations for decades. In Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, American forces consistently applied maximum firepower to enemy positions before committing ground troops. The tactics evolved and weapons improved, but the fundamental principle remained unchanged. Industrial capacity enabled weapons superiority that made conventional defenses obsolete. Enemies could accept this reality and surrender, or they could resist and be destroyed systematically. The final assessment of napalm's role in the Pacific War must acknowledge both its tactical effectiveness and its moral complexity. The weapon shortened battles, reduced American casualties, and contributed materially to victory. It also killed thousands of Japanese soldiers in ways that many considered unnecessarily cruel. Both statements are true. The weapon was effective and terrible. It saved American lives and ended Japanese lives with industrial efficiency. It demonstrated American technological superiority and destroyed Japanese confidence. It shortened the war and created psychological traumas that lasted lifetimes. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, who commanded on Peleliu, summarized napalm's impact in his final message before ritual suicide. The Americans have brought weapons we cannot counter, not because we lack courage or training or dedication, but because we lack the industrial capacity to produce equivalent weapons in equivalent quantities. The napalm they use in one day exceeds our total production. This imbalance cannot be overcome through sacrifice. It can only be acknowledged. We die, knowing that our death achieves nothing except delay. Perhaps that delay has value, perhaps it does not, but we have no choice except to die or surrender. Most of us will choose death because it is what we were taught, but know that this choice is not strategic. It is merely the final expression of a doctrine that could not adapt to industrial warfare. The thousands of Japanese soldiers who died in flames across Pacific islands, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, died believing their sacrifice had meaning. Most maintained faith in eventual victory, or at least negotiated peace long after such outcomes became impossible. The napalm that killed them was simply a tool, a weapon deployed by men following orders within a system designed for maximum efficiency. But for those who died, and for those who watched them die, napalm became something more. It became the symbol of modern industrial warfare's capacity to render individual courage meaningless, to reduce fortifications to crematoriums, to make defense impossible and victory certain through systematic application of overwhelming force. That is why Japanese soldiers feared napalm more than bullets, shells, or bayonets. Not because it killed more people, which it did not. Not because death was certain, which it was with any weapon in sustained combat, They feared it because napalm killed in ways that violated every assumption about honorable death in battle, because it made fortresses into traps, because it demonstrated industrial capacity that Japan could never match, because it proved that the war was lost before the first battle was fought. The only question was how many would die before surrender became inevitable. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto, whose opening observation began this account, died on Iwo Jima on March 10, 1945. His bunker was destroyed by a sustained napalm attack that killed all 11 defenders. His diary was recovered by American forces and eventually returned to his family in Japan decades later. His final entry, written hours before the attack, captured what he and thousands like him learned facing American napalm. Tomorrow they will come with the fire weapons. We have watched them work methodically through the caves around us. First, the tanks with flames that reach 100 meters, then the infantry with portable flamethrowers, then the explosives to seal what remains. We cannot stop them. We have tried everything. Nothing works. The fire finds every opening. The heat kills even when flames do not reach you. The oxygen disappears and you cannot breathe. Death comes slowly, painfully. This is not how samurai should die. But we are not samurai. We are soldiers of an empire that declared war against a nation with 10 times our industrial capacity. We are paying the price for that decision. The Americans will win, not because their soldiers are braver, though they are brave, not because their tactics are better, though they are good. They will win because they can produce napalm faster than we can die. That is the truth no one wanted to admit. Industrial war favors those with industry. Japan never had a chance. We were defeated before the first shot was fired. Everything since then has been dying slowly while pretending the outcome remained in doubt. Tomorrow the pretending ends for me. The flames will come, and I will die. Not for victory, which is impossible, not for honor, which burns as easily as flesh, but because I am here and the flames are coming and there is nowhere left to run. The fire came as he predicted. The position fell. The war continued for 5 more months, but its outcome was never in doubt. American industrial capacity, expressed through weapons like napalm, had made Japanese resistance futile from the beginning. The courage of Japanese defenders, the sophistication of their fortifications, the depth of their commitment, all proved insufficient against an enemy that could produce fire weapons faster than defenders could die. That was the lesson written in flames across 1,000 Pacific islands. Industrial warfare had rendered traditional military virtues necessary but insufficient. Victory required both courage and capacity. Japan had one. America had both. The difference was measured in tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers who died in flames, learning too late that spirit could not overcome systematic industrial destruction. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now. And don't forget to subscribe.